This is Renee Romeo of ReneeRomeo.com. Today's project is really fun. It's all about making creepy Halloween food. Now, I stumbled across a website called It Came From Under My Bed, and this website actually makes inedible props for Halloween, and one of the props was a pie with a face incorporated into it. Really creepy, but I'd love to make this edible, so it's something that you can pick up and take to your Halloween party and really creep people out. But you know what? It's also going to be incredibly delicious. So let's go ahead and start making the crust and show you just how easy this project is. Now, I'm using a food processor to mix up the crust ingredients, but if you don't have that, you can use an old-fashioned pastry cutter like this with a large bowl and get it to be about this consistency. It might take about 5 minutes longer with the pastry cutter. But with the food processor, I have a total of 3 cups of flour, 2½ sticks of salted butter, a ½ teaspoon of salt, and 3/4 of a cup of very cold water. And I'm actually dividing this into 2 separate batches because my processor is a little bit small and can't really handle that amount. So we'll go ahead and pulse this in place. So I'm finishing this crust off with the pastry cutter and a large bowl just to show you what that looks like. And you'll see it's coming together really nicely. This is exactly what you want. You want this consistency because you want that actual crust to look a little like skin. So the skin is going to have some elasticity to it, and so will this crust. So the dough is nice and fluffy. I've formed it into a ball and wrapped it in plastic wrap, and now I'm going to set it in the refrigerator until I'm ready to use it. Now, in a frying pan, you're going to put 2 tablespoons of butter, a 1/4 cup of chopped onion, a teaspoon of pepper, a ½ teaspoon of salt, and a ½ teaspoon of celery salt. Once this cooks down about 10 minutes, you're going to take a teaspoon of Bell's seasoning, or you can use chicken poultry seasoning. Once it gets nice and browned, you're going to take 1 cup of chicken broth and add it. Turn it down to simmer, give it a stir, and then add 1 cup of heavy cream. In a pourable measuring cup, I've mixed a 1/4 cup of flour with a 1/4 cup of very cold water. I've trickled the cold water into the flour to make this consistency. Now I'm going to pour it into this chicken broth mixture, and then once that's done, I can go ahead and set it aside. Now that the gravy is done for the inside of the pie, it's cooling on top of the stove with a lid. I've also gone ahead and turned the oven on to 425 degrees, and I had a big pot of boiling water going, which is actually taking care of the potatoes that I have here, the mixed vegetables, the cubed up chicken, and some chicken sausage. So this is going to be set aside and allowed to cool to room temperature while I'm working on the crust. So I have a pie plate ready to go. I've cut this in half. So I'll place this piece down and I'll return the other one to the refrigerator until I'm ready to use that. Now I'm just going to coat this in flour and I'll get a nice press down. Then I'll take a secondary piece of plastic wrap and place it over the top. So you see, I've started rolling this piece of pastry dough out, and I'm working from the center out. Now the way you test to see if it's big enough, you hold it upside down, make sure it's going to reach all across the edges, and this looks pretty good to me. So we're going to go ahead and unwrap this. And in one swoop, we're going to take the corners of the plastic wrap and pretty quickly get it to go over the top of this pie plate. Just like that, and then you can peel it off. I'm just going to go ahead and coax this into the edges so that you make sure that you get it into all the corners here. Even if you have to kind of fold it and overlap it a little bit in the beginning, that's just fine. We'll just go ahead and make our way around until everything reaches all the way along that bottom edge. So you see, I'm just taking some pastry shears and cutting off the excess. I'm just going around that perimeter. So this is all I really need to do at this point. We're just getting this prepped to be par-baked a little bit so we can actually pour that stuff in and make sure that it's not going to get soggy along the bottom. So I'm just going to par-bake this for about 8 minutes. So when you pull this out of the oven, you may have an air pocket underneath the dough. Please resist trying to press it down or anything. Just let it kind of gently go down on its own. And once it does, you could start filling the pie. So we're going to start out with the eyes first. So I have 4 potatoes here that I'm using to create these hills and valleys in the face and make it look really realistic. Now the idea here is I'm going to go ahead and hollow out these 2 potatoes and insert a couple of hard-boiled eggs. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a valley in here. You know, it's par cooked, So these are pretty easy to cut, but the very inside really isn't cooked yet. So this is going to be, you know, the most challenging part of the entire process is to get this valley just right so the egg sits in there perfectly. And I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to go ahead and remove the skin. So I have 2 slices of potato left over from these 2 potatoes. I'm going to go ahead and layer them, and then I'm going to set this nice flat red potato right on top. So I'm going to take the mixture of the vegetables and the meat, and I'm just going to layer this around those potatoes. So now that all the vegetables are in, we're just going to go ahead and try to mold these a little bit more to kind of get little cheeks in here and kind of get some hills and valleys going over the eyes and around to the mouth. So that way it'll make putting the top crust on a lot easier. And let's roll out the top crust the exact same way. So I'm taking my shears once again and just trimming off a little bit. Now what you need to do here is you actually need to take this top crust and get it to kind of go in and over the bottom crust. See kind of what I'm making here is like a little well. It's exactly what you want. Once you do that, you can go ahead and trim off the excess and make sure that everything is nice and put together, because you don't want this leaking out in your oven too much. And it may, so when you put it in there, make sure you put a cookie sheet underneath it. Now I love this pie with a fork edge. I think it makes it look like you're stitching or something, but I'm just crimping this, and this is really like Sweeney Todd to me, you know, making pies out of body parts. If you don't know who that is, you can look that up. It's a really great folktale, especially around Halloween. So there is my edge. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a nice sharp knife and I'm going to go ahead and slit the eyes. Now, you know, usually an eyelid on the top is a little larger than the bottom. So let's go ahead and see how we can accommodate this and kind of try to open it a little bit, so we can expose that egg underneath, and I think that's really creepy right there. So let's go ahead and do the other side. Oh, that's looking really gruesome. I love it. All right, and then we have a nose that we're going to go ahead and actually make on our own, but let's go ahead with the mouth. Just open it a little bit because it probably will steam during the baking process and open up even more. So I'd like to add some extra dough pieces to this to make it look more realistic, such as eyebrows and lips. So I'm using a little bit of egg wash. So I have a separated egg here, and I'm using the egg white part, which is actually going to act as a method of getting this to hold together. And I can kind of manipulate this a little bit and just get it to stick. Something kind of like that, and then you can, you know, mold it in place, kind of like, you know, old Play-Doh days. Creepy, super creepy. Get this to open up a little more. I'm gonna stick in here like a couple teeth here and there. I think that's just great. I think that looks so awful and so wonderful at the same time. So now I'm taking an egg yolk, I'm taking about a tablespoon of tomato paste, and I'm going to take about, I'd say, a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce and mix this together. So this is going to be like blood curdling, disgusting looking around the eyes and the mouth. We're just going to brush this on. And the very last thing is I've whipped up the egg white, and I'm just going to give this a coating over the top. It's going to really give it a great sheen, and I think it's going to make it look absolutely disgusting and creepy. But you know what? This is going to be the most delicious pot pie you or your guests have ever tasted. So let's pop it in the oven for 35 minutes on 425 degrees. So this has been in for about 15 minutes, but at this point you can kind of see I'm creating some kind of brown areas, but they're getting a little too brown. So I'm just going to take a piece of aluminum foil, set it over the top of the mouth and the nose, and then pop it back in. I also need to do this to the edges to make sure they don't burn either. So the way that you do this is you tear off a few sections of aluminum foil and you're just going to set these around the edges. I'm loving it. So I really love the way that this turned out, but I took the rest of the tomato paste and I added about a 1/4 cup of Worcestershire sauce to it because I'd like it to be a little bit more. Well, I've added a couple of Kalamata olives for the eyeballs, and I think it really makes this pie come to life. You know, this is creepy, it's gruesome, and I don't think there's anything more macabre than having a human face baked into a pie. So this is Renee Romeo of ReneeRomeo.com. Happy Halloween, and I'm gonna wait about 20 minutes before I cut into this pie. I'll show you what it looks like, and it smells wonderful.